Imagine a science fiction show with one of the most interesting time travel concepts ever put on television. A government chrononaut travels exactly 7 days into the past to stop disasters before they begin. It had action, conspiracy, aliens, government black ops, and a charismatic lead actor who threw himself into stunts and emotional scenes. Now imagine that despite all of that, almost no one today remembers it. This is the story of 7 Days, the UPN sci-fi series that lasted 3 seasons before quietly disappearing from pop culture. Its history is far stranger than its premise, involving low ratings, network instability, behind-the-scenes departures, and a studio that never quite knew what to do with it. 7 Days premiered on October 7th, 1998, created by Christopher Crowe and Zachary Crowe, using an early concept pitched by Paramount Television president Carey McCluggage. The core idea was simple but unique. A secret facility known as Never Never Land had recovered alien technology from the Roswell crash and used it to build a device capable of sending one person, a chrononaut, exactly 1 week back in time. That man was Frank Parker, a former Navy SEAL with a traumatic past and a volatile personality. Unlike other time travel shows that sent characters decades or centuries backward, this series focused on immediate crises like assassinations, bombings, viral outbreaks, or military disasters. It blended military thrillers, political conspiracies, and episodic sci-fi in a way that no other 90s show was doing. UPN was struggling at the time. The network needed shows that could help build its identity and compete with the more established Fox and WB networks. 7 Days had a strong pilot, an exciting sci-fi premise, and an action-heavy style that UPN hoped would attract a young male audience. Jonathan LaPaglia was cast as Frank Parker, and his intense, gritty performance became the anchor of the entire show. He carried emotional weight, humor, action sequences, and dramatic outbursts. His character was unstable by design, and the writers used that instability to build tension. Every time he jumped back in time, he had 7 days to change fate, often at great personal cost. The production itself relied heavily on stunts, military hardware, and special effects. For a struggling network like UPN, this made the series one of its more expensive shows. Sets had to reflect high-tech government interiors, hangar bays, alien technology, and elaborate control rooms. The time travel sphere required multiple builds for different camera angles. Episodes often featured explosions, vehicle chases, undercover operations, and special forces combat scenes. The show pushed the limits of UPN's budget, which later became one of the reasons it struggled to survive. During season 1, 7 Days performed moderately well, enough for UPN to renew it, but it never became a breakout hit. Its ratings were just strong enough to justify continuation, but not strong enough to elevate the network or pull in new viewers. Still, the cast built strong chemistry. LaPaglia carried most of the emotional heavy lifting. Don Franklin played Craig Donovan, a fellow operative who balanced Parker's instability with calm professionalism. Justina Vale played Olga Vukovic, a doctor and scientist who served as Parker's confidant and occasional love interest. The mix worked well on screen, and the show developed a small but dedicated fan base. Behind the scenes, however, the cracks were already forming. The combination of long filming days, heavy stunt work, and UPN's constant pressure to deliver higher ratings created tension among the cast and crew. The show demanded intense production schedules because each episode had to feature a crisis, a jump, and a full resolution within the 7 day reset. Writers were constantly under pressure to deliver scripts quickly, and the cast had to shoot physically demanding scenes week after week. For a network show with limited budget and limited staff, the pace was punishing. Season 2 continued the momentum, but by this time, UPN was struggling financially. Multiple shows were failing, and the network had no identity. 7 Days was one of the few science fiction series they had, yet they spent minimal effort promoting it. Instead of building marketing campaigns, UPN often aired it with little promotion, making it harder for new viewers to discover. Without strong advertising, the audience began to plateau. Still, the series remained steady enough to justify a third season, but the pressure inside the production only increased. This pressure came to a breaking point near the end of season 2. Justina Vale, who played Olga, was experiencing severe emotional strain from the workload and the pace of shooting. Reports from the time indicate that she was dealing with exhaustion and stress related to the demands of the series. By season 3, she made the difficult decision to leave the show. In interviews, she stated that the environment had become too overwhelming and she needed to step away from acting entirely. This departure fundamentally changed the core dynamic of the series, and her absence forced the writers to restructure relationships and shift focus toward action-based storytelling. With one of the main trio gone, the show felt different. The chemistry that held the first 2 seasons together had been disrupted. UPN, already struggling with its identity and budget problems, was losing confidence in its programming slate. The network had survived largely on Star Trek Voyager and wrestling content. 7 Days, while respected by its small fan base, was never a major player for UPN. It wasn't attracting new viewers, and it wasn't generating enough attention to justify continued investment. By the time the third season aired, the writing was already on the wall. Ratings were declining, the cast dynamic had shifted, and UPN was moving toward reality programming and cheaper alternatives. The network was heading toward merger with the WB to form what would eventually become the CW. In the unstable environment of a collapsing network, 7 Days became one of the shows targeted for cancellation. As 7 Days entered its third season, the strain behind the scenes became impossible to ignore. The departure of Justina Vale removed one of the show's emotional pillars. Her character had grounded Frank Parker and served as a moral anchor for the team. Without her, the writers shifted the tone of the series toward more action-driven plots. New characters tried to fill the void, but the chemistry that made the early seasons work could not be recreated. The show felt different, and the audience could sense the change. Jonathan LaPaglia, who played Frank Parker, also felt the effects of this shift. His character was already written as emotionally unstable, often carrying the trauma of his missions and the burden of repeatedly reliving the same week. The intensity of the role, combined with the demands of the production schedule, took a toll. Reports indicated that he too considered leaving the show. While he remained until the end, the stress of carrying nearly every episode added weight to an already difficult filming process. UPN's internal problems only made matters worse. The network was losing money and faced declining ratings across most of its programming. Its identity crisis grew deeper as it struggled to decide between sci-fi shows, sitcoms, and reality television. Voyager remained its strongest scripted series, and WWE SmackDown became the network's most reliable performer. Everything else was increasingly vulnerable to cancellation, including 7 Days. Marketing support for the show dropped sharply during season 3. Advertisements were limited, and the network rarely promoted reruns or scheduled marathons. This lack of visibility made it nearly impossible for the show to gain new viewers. Science fiction series often rely on strong fan engagement and promotion, and 7 Days was receiving neither. Without support from its own network, the series fell into obscurity even while it was still airing. Behind the scenes, the production staff faced growing challenges. With shrinking budgets, writers were pushed to create episodes that required fewer locations and less special effects work. As a result, many of the later episodes leaned on bottle plots or character interactions rather than the high-concept time travel stories that defined the first 2 seasons. While this helped the budget, it further distanced the show from its original appeal. The cancellation came quietly. By the time the third season finished airing in 2001, UPN was preparing for a future merger that would eventually combine it with the WB to form the CW. Under these shifting corporate priorities, 7 Days was seen as an unnecessary expense, especially with its declining ratings and high production costs. The network issued no grand announcement. There was no series finale promotion, no cast farewell, and no attempt to resolve lingering story arcs. The show simply ended, leaving fans with questions that were never answered. After its cancellation, 7 Days rapidly faded from public awareness. Unlike other sci-fi shows from the era, it did not receive a major DVD release at the time, which hurt its visibility. It rarely appeared in syndication, and without streaming platforms during those years, there was no easy way for new fans to discover it. In an age before algorithm-driven rediscovery, shows that went off the air often disappeared entirely unless they had massive cult followings. 7 Days had a small, loyal audience, but it was not large enough to sustain its memory in the broader culture. The rise of streaming in the 2000s briefly brought attention back to old science fiction series, but 7 Days still struggled to reemerge. Rights issues and the lack of a major distributor meant the show never received the remastering or promotion necessary to reintroduce it to modern audiences. While other shows from the era, like The X-Files, Stargate SG-1, and Farscape, found new life via streaming platforms, 7 Days remained mostly unavailable. Despite this, the show maintains a quiet legacy. Fans who watched it in the 90s remember its unique premise and emotional storytelling. The concept of resetting a catastrophic event by sending a single operative exactly 7 days into the past remains one of the most distinctive time travel mechanics ever put on television. Even today, no major network series has attempted to replicate its formula. In this way, 7 Days occupies a strange place in science fiction history. Ambitious, original, well acted, and yet almost entirely forgotten. The story of 7 Days is not about scandal or dramatic implosion. Instead, it is the story of a show that existed at the wrong time, on the wrong network, with the wrong level of support. It was a series trying to thrive during an era when UPN itself was struggling to survive. Between cast departures, production strain, a lack of promotion, and the network's identity crisis, the show had no chance to reach its full potential. Today, the memory of 7 Days survives mainly through fan discussions, scattered online archives, and the few people who fondly recall tuning in each week to watch Frank Parker jump back in time to save the world in just 7 days. It may not be a household name, but its story remains a fascinating glimpse into the challenges of 90s television, the realities of network instability, and the quiet disappearance of a sci-fi series that deserved far more than it ever received.